Hi everyone, welcome back to the Magic the Gathering cover of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This is my first opinion view of everything to do with the set, and this part we're covering all of the red cards which I have available via Scryfall. At the stage of this recording, this is as pre-release is going on, or at this stage it's probably finished because it's getting later as I'm recording this. So before the set comes out officially on Friday, I want to share my viewpoints on each part of this set and put them up going live so that you have my first opinions on all these cards, because I've avoided most of the spoilers, so I've seen bits and pieces but nothing like what I've been going through. This set is weird. It seems powerful in places and weak in others, and hopefully red might be able to change my opinion on some of these. And we're going to start off strong with Rkv Ember Keeper, hopefully strong at least. Enchantment creature. Whenever a modified creature dies, create a 1/1 spirit token. Since when does red create spirit tokens? That's weird. Also, it's colorless. So I imagine modifying creatures is going to be super easily, given that how many things cause modify here. The fact it's a cheap body is good. The 2/1 effect is probably relevant for the fact it creates a lot of tokens. I think that's generically okay. Like, that is a decent common. The fact is when something dies, it's a non-token bow, so it can't recur itself too much, but that makes sense for what it's doing. Aki Ronin, Goblin Samurai, 1/3, so decent stat line for what it's got. Whenever a warrior or samurai attacks alone, you may discard a card, draw a card. I think that's relevant. I think that's perfectly okay. Like, we've seen a lot of samurais, we've seen a lot of warriors. Discard a card, drawing a card is just a good effect, and the fact it's a 1/3, it keeps itself slightly more alive. It's a good early game blocker for a lot of things. For, as we've seen the previous card, is a 2/1. I think it's perfectly relevant. Aki Warpaint, single red or enchantment for a creature and artifact, gets 2/2/1. I think that is perfectly relevant. Like, I think that's perfectly okay. It's a decently cheap enchantment aura, which just makes something bigger. It's common, it's decent, it's red. I think that's an okay card. It doesn't need to be complicated. If it was any more than one, I'd be upset. If it was any more than one, I would expect it to give it like haste or another card effect. But as it stands, I think that's just okay. It does what it says on the tin. It gives something a bigger effect, and when it stops being a creature, it turns off the effect. So if you give it to one of these modify reconfigure creatures and equip it, then it loses the effect. If you give it to a vehicle, it becomes a vehicle, loses the effect, but it doesn't lose it permanently. So I think that's perfectly relevant. Ambitious Assault, instant speed, creatures get +2/+0 to end of turn. If you control a modified creature, draw a card. Okay, so 3 mana for a charging effect. I think that's pretty decent. And the fact it does have the additional effect of drawing a card if something is modified, I think this is okay. I think it's actually pretty decent. I know I've been saying before about like the aura enchantment and the artifact thing, like having it both lines, having both being annoying, but given how easy modify seems to be, I think that is much more relevant here and is more likely to go off. And even without the effect, a war trumpet effect can sometimes just end games, so I think this is perfectly good. And the fact it has an upside for its cost, I think it's slightly better than some other like war trumpet effects, which in white sometimes cost 4. In fact, if anything, I'm more disappointed this isn't a white card. Ashore of the Blazing Sky, this is the Dragon Cycle part, so this is a 4 mana one this time, so it's slightly smaller. It's a 4/4, so relevant stat lines. Each one has had relevant stat lines. Flying Trample, and when it dies, what does it do? Exile top cards of the library, you may cast those cards. Hang on. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. Okay. Does what red does. Exiles cards, lets you play them. The randomness of that one could be a bit weird, but I feel like that could be recurable really nicely. Or create 3 treasure tokens. So you don't get a full refund on the card, but you get 3 treasure tokens. I think that's perfectly serviceable. For flying 4/4 trample in the air, I think that is more relevant for the most part, but having the effect to actually create tokens or being able to like exile cards depending on your situation, I think that's perfectly good. I think that's actually really decent. I think that's very playable. It's going to be very scary to see hit the board. I think that's a really, really good mythic. It's generically good. Like, the effects of it are generically good. It doesn't break the game. It probably could with heavy recursion, heavy strategy in it. But by itself, playing it as a single drawn of, it doesn't break the game, but it changes and does stuff which is relevant text. Bronze Plate Brawl. I think this card I have seen in a spoiler. It's a trample creature. When it's equipped, it gives something +3/+2 and trample. Reconfigure 5. For 3/2, 3/2, it's not. Sorry, for 3 mana, 3/2, it's not bad. For its equip cost, it's a bit high, but generically, it's just okay because it is a trampling creature. It's got a decent body on it for its cost. It's going to do some damage, but I don't think it's super relevant as an equipment creature. I think it's just a good, maybe, if it becomes relevant in an equipment strategy, maybe. But overall, I think it's just going to be just a good sealed card. Crackling Eminence, or Emergent, sorry, is a 2 mana enchantment aura. Enchanted Land. Enchanted Land is a 3/5 red spirit creature with haste, which is still a land. If it be destroyed, sacrifice this instead, and the land gains indestructible to end of turn. Okay, I kind of dig this. It makes a creature, a 3/5 creature for 2. Sure, it turns your land into it. It gives your land haste, so it can attack. So it's probably more likely to be played on turn 3 to make it actually do something. And instead of it just generically getting destroyed in combat, you can sacrifice this and just turn it back into a land. Yeah, okay, I think that's perfectly relevant. Like, I think that's perfectly fair. It works. It does what it says on the tin. I feel like this could probably do some decent work. I like the fact it can return the land back to its original state, because a lot of like enchantments which turns lands into creatures tend to end up with the land being destroyed and you falling behind. This just allows you to protect your own land afterwards. Dragonspark Reactor. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under control, put a counter on it. Sacrifice this, deals damage to target. Deals damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to a target player, and that much damage to a target creature. Okay, that's kind of cool. So play this early on. Just drop a whole bunch of artifacts, get a whole bunch of counters on it, proliferate everything else, all the other cards which add counters. This thing could kill someone. I'm sorry, this thing could just kill someone. This thing is actually really scary when you actually read it properly. This is a win con. 4 mana is not a hard milestone to reach, especially when you're already like pumping it up early. You can get a lot of stuff going off very quickly. I think this is going to be very playable, especially in artifact-based strategies, especially treasure-making based strategies. The fact that it says when an artifact enters the battlefield, that includes treasures, tokens, anything else. Like, just make infinite tokens, like infinite treasure tokens. Abuse the dragon we talked about before to make treasure tokens. And in fact, it has a counter when it comes in itself. Like, and it doesn't tap. You could just pay 4 to do this at any time. For a grand total of 6 mana, this is a win con for an uncommon. I think this is arguably probably the most powerful card we've seen so far. Alright, and next up we've got the Experimental Synthesizer, 1 mana. I like red is going for the low cost cards at the moment. Let's see, when it enters or leaves the battlefield, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of next turn you may play that card. So, okay, generic, when it enters it does something, when it leaves it does something, and it has a sacrifice effect. Create a samurai token with vigilance, activate sorcery speed. This is okay. The fact it's a single mana is very relevant, and it does something when it enters, it does something when it leaves, and the fact you can sacrifice it to create something actually is kind of okay. So I think this is very decent. It's going to be playable, it's going to be used, it's going to see some use. Especially because that last card is just a win con as well to mention with it. Explosive Entry. Sorcery speed, destroy 1 target artifact, put +1/+1 counter on something. As I've been saying, +1/+1 counters, I feel like, although yes, modify is a big thing right now, I don't feel like that's big enough just for its effect. Destroy 1 target, or up to 1. just destroying one artifact doesn't feel great right now. It's the only one we've seen of it, but I doubt it's going to be the last one we see. Artifact removal is going to be big in this set because of how many things are just artifacts. But I feel like by itself it's not fantastic. Alright, next up we got the Mythic Spell, which is 2 red and 8. Jesus Christ, this is expensive. Additional cost to cast a spell, you may tap any number of untapped creatures to reduce this card's cost by 1. Does 10 damage to any target. So it's got Convoke. You tap your creatures to pay for this cost, to deal 10 damage to one thing at sorcery speed. It's half someone's life in a base game. It's a quarter of their life in a commander game. But getting to up to 8 creatures could be a lot. We haven't seen many major token makers, like Experimental Synthesizer we just spoke about creates 1 soldier token. White didn't create like an army of soldier tokens. It's going to be very late game, but I feel like if you draw this like early on, you're going to be suffering with it for a long time, because yes, 10 damage seems like a lot, and reducing its cost for creatures, tapping those creatures as well, dropping your walls a little bit. I don't know, I feel like there's more relevance to having the creatures being available as attackers than there is to having one big spell being cast. And so far we haven't seen a copy spell, so I might be missing something, but I feel like this is just a little bit too high cost to be as useful as it looks it is. Like, it could be really good, but just as it stands, I feel like it needs one extra step to make it better. Fabled the Mirror Breaker is another one of these saga creatures. So, number 1, create a shaman with whenever this creature attacks, create a treasure token. That's kind of cool, already good. 3 mana to do that. Second part is discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many. Again, recursion or replacement, always good. And Kiki Jiki, okay, this Kiki Jiki is a really old card, just for context here, which essentially originally is part of a many major infinite loops of winning the game. So have they broken it in this one? So pay 1 and tap it. Create a token copy of another target non-legendary creature you control. It has haste, sacrifice it at the next end step. So technically, yes, this has looping potential because you're creating a token copy of something. You're tapping this and paying 1, but paying 1 is the only change in the cost of this card's effect compared to its original. And given how many treasure makers there are now, I feel like there's ways of abusing this and making it infinite. The fact it's on a saga which is super slow might change it, but I don't know. Especially since you're creating something which creates a treasure token to start with here. I feel like this could get very broken very fast unless someone destroys the enchantment early. If it sticks around for too long, I feel like it could end the game. Flame Discharge deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker if you control a modified card. Hang on. If you control a modified creature as you cast this spell, it deals X plus 2 damage instead. So, instant pay X, deal damage to a single thing, could deal 2 more if you control 1. It doesn't say each, it just says 1. So, I don't think this is too great. At worst, it is just a shock, because you have a modified creature, you deal 2 damage to something. At best, you're paying a lot of mana to kill a single thing. Does it say... Yeah, it says target creature or planeswalker, so it's specifically not your opponent. It's okay. It's an instant speed, so if you have spare mana, it's something to pump mana into. X-spells are usually just okay mana sinks, but the fact that it's very specific in what it can hit might tarnish how much it can do. But so far, we haven't seen like a generic shock card in so much. But it's definitely better than the other card above, the sorcery speed one, because at least with this one you can choose how much you're putting into it, where the other one you need pretty much exactly 8 creatures just to use its killing effect. Although it doesn't hit a player, so maybe not. I'm probably wrong with that one. Gift of Wrath. Enchant creature or artifact. As long as the permanent is a creature, gains +2 and menace. Cool, like that. And when it leaves, it creates a red spirit token with menace. Okay, like this. It's 4 mana, it's expensive, but it creates bonus power. We haven't seen too much ninjutsu with red, so I'm not going to go on that path with it yet. But creating a menace creature does assist that strategy, yes. But as well as creating another body with the relevant keyword when it dies, is still pretty good, so it replaces itself for 4 mana. For 4 mana you make something bigger, and you replace itself with something smaller when it goes away. I don't dislike that. I think that is playable. Probably sealed playable, but not commander playable. We've got our shrine coming up, our creature shrine, 3 mana this time, which is good. First strike shrine. Let's see, you pay 1. When you do, deal X damage to target player or planeswalker with X number of shrines. This is probably the most relevant one so far. It's a 3 mana 2/2 with first strike, and if you have just this one, you're dealing 1 damage to something. If you have all 5, you're dealing 5 damage to something. If you're playing commander and had the full shrine deck, you could be dealing up to 15. Like, that could get very scary very fast. So I think that's probably the most relevant shrine so far. In fact, it has first strike, is extremely good because it has a good layer of protection on itself. I'm surprised the shrines aren't defenders, to be blunt. I really thought they would be. Goro, Disciple of the Usui. Legendary Goblin Samurai. Pay red. Creatures you control gain haste to end of turn. That's kind of cool. So, gives everything haste, not just itself. And you can just pay 1 red to do it. Pay 5. Create a dragon spirit token. Does it have flying? With flying. If you control an attacking modified creature. Okay, so you'd have to build around having modify in place for this. Let's be fair. So, and it has to be an attacking creature too. So the second effect is a bit rough to get around. So it's a combat trick to create a dragon. It's not attacking dragon, it's just a dragon. But it creates an additional token. It doesn't have to be it which is attacking. It's a 5/5 dragon, which is always powerful. It's 5/5 for 5 though, which is another thing to consider. But the haste ability could just be worth it for Goblin. Hekazo Yamazai of the General. Trample. Whenever a samurai or warrior attacks alone, probably. Yep. You may cast an artifact from your graveyard this turn. So, when you attack with a single samurai or warrior, play another artifact from the graveyard. It's relevant. At least it's not itself which has to attack. I think that's decent. A 4 mana 3/3 is okay, especially since it has trample. A lot of the artifacts so far in red have been creatures or enchantments. Or equipments or creatures, so that's been useful. I think that's an okay card. Okay, Invoke Calamity. So far the Invoke cycle has not impressed me. So, 4 red mana and 1. You may cast 2 instant sorcery spells with total mana 6 or less from your graveyard without paying their mana costs. If those spells were put into your graveyard, put them in exile instead. Exile and Invoke the Calamity. Okay, this is probably the most relevant one because it lets you play 2 more cards, but mana value or 6 or less, so it's limiting on that. You could probably do some win the game strategies with this. This is the most relevant one. It's still super expensive for what it does, but at least it does something. Like, it grabs stuff from the graveyard, but I do still feel like there's better cards which do this more efficiently and cause better win the game strategy. The fact it exiles them and this is also annoying because that turns off a lot of recursion. Ironhoof Boar. Trample Haste 5/4/4/6, which is a decent stat line, I guess. Channel though. Discard. Target creature gets +3/+1 and gains trample to end of turn. Actually, I kind of like that. Yeah, discard. Give something +3/+1 and trample, so it's a powerful cantrip. We definitely now know that channel gives like instant speed, so that is something I don't need to worry about anymore. I wasn't sure at the beginning, but now, given how these cards are reading out, it's good. The fact it has haste as well, I've just noticed, is probably really good too when it gets cast as a creature. I think that is sealed playable. Arguably, it could also see some Fringe Commander play depending on deck, because recurring artifacts isn't hard. It's a creature to hit the board. You can return it to hand in several ways and reuse it as cantrips. Yeah, I think that's useful. Cameo of the Industry. When it enters, return target artifact card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Cool, that goes to the battlefield. And give it haste, but sacrifice it at the next end step. 5 mana 3/6. If it didn't have that clause of 3 or less, I feel like this would be a lot stronger. Because that basically locks you out of doing that 4 thing from before. But I think 3/6 for 5 mana is a lot better than the 3/5s we were seeing before. It's a lot more defensive than some of the other pieces, so I think that's a lot more relevant. Kami's Flare, 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Also deals 2 damage to that controller if you control a modified card. That is just, yeah, that's a decent card. That just does 3 damage to target card. It's a removal card in most places. And honestly, it's really decent to do so. 2 more damage to the opponent if you control something which has modified. Could be okay, but I'm not going to count on that one. Kindled Fury, 1 red, +1/+0 and first strike to end of turn. Cantrip, doesn't do much else. I don't think that's too great, honestly. Like, first strike is a cool key term, but it just doesn't do a lot by itself. The +1/+0 is nice, but if it said draw a card like some of the other cards have, I think it would have been more relevant. Kamigawa, Faces of Kazan, deals 1 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control. I guess it could kill some weak things, maybe. Let's see here. When you cast your next creature spell this turn, it enters an additional +1/+1 counter on it, so immediately causes modify. And the creature is a hasty creature. Oh, that's something I didn't consider. Yeah, the enchantment creature would come in without haste. Ooh, that's actually kind of bad. If a creature dealt damage by a source you control this turn would die, exile it instead. So, wait, is that just a one-off or is that permanently? If a creature dealt damage this turn by a source you control would die, exile it instead. It sounds like it's only going to go off once. That's like a permanent on the board exile cards instead. That would be much cooler. But as it stands, I just don't think it's super great. These creatures have been fantastic aside from a couple. Lizard Blades, double strike. Equipped creature has double strike. It's a reconfigure for 2, so it's an easy to equip. It's a 1/1. It's good. Double strike is a very powerful keyword. Like, allowing someone to attack twice is always very good, but a 1/1 by itself, I feel like this thing would die much faster than it would be if it was just an equipment. We've got the fun one coming up. Okay. March of Reckless Joy. This is the X spell, which makes you exile red cards to make it cheaper. Okay, so we already know what the rest of this does, so the first line of text is making it cheaper. Exile the top X card of your library. You may play 2 of those cards at the end of your next turn. I mean, this is probably the most playable one. The blue one, which allows you to causing phasing to protect stuff, is really powerful, but this one here replaces cards. So if you exile 1 red card, you exile 2 cards, and you may play those later on. So for 1 card, you're gaining 2, if you can play them. So it is a replacement effect. It's not drawing, but it's useful. The downside to this one is that it only lets you pick 2 of those cards, and it exiles the rest of them. So not only are you exiling cards from your hand, you're exiling the rest of the stack. You don't have to pick the 2 cards, so you can choose anything out of the stack you exile, I guess, but I feel like this is going to be very powerful, yes. I still don't like the fact it causes a negative in like what your resources are, but I can see this being the most useful because it actually lets you find cards to play and doesn't force you into your choice of what cards to choose. You play any of those 2 cards until your next end step, not just the one. At instant speed, this is probably the most playable one. As much as I don't like this cycle, to be honest, like, I don't like the fact you're exiling cards from your hand to make an X spell cheaper. I mean, I know you don't have to, but the option of having it there just feels like it's going to be used that way. Ogre-Headed Helm. This is just a crab with legs. What is this thing? Let's see here. Equipped creature gets +2/+2. Whenever it attacks, or as equipped creature attacks and deals combat damage, you may sacrifice it. If you do, discard your hand and draw 3 cards. Okay. It feels weird. So, 2 mana 2/2, swing of it. If you're low on resources, sacrifice it, draw cards. I don't dislike that, but it feels very situational. I think it's a good card. Like, red tends to burn through its resources very fast because very cheap spells. The fact it's a 2/2 for 2 is decent. The fact it equips for 3. I don't like the fact you can sacrifice the creature. Actually, no, if you sacrifice the creature, it doesn't sacrifice the artifact. So yeah, that's actually a really good card. Peerless Samurai, Menace, for 3 mana. Whenever something attacks alone, next spell you cast costs 1 less. That's actually a decent effect. That's not bad. And the fact it has Menace is a good keyword. And the fact it's 2/3 is also good for 3 mana. Rabbit Battery. Haste. Quick creature has haste. And reconfigure for 1. As I said before, 1/1 Hasty Giver is good. The fact it equips for 1 as well is good, and it's a 1/1 creature to start with, so that could be relevant. But the fact it's also a 1 toughness creature also means it dies super quickly. But honestly, it's probably more relevant than other red 1 mana haste giving equipment because it does have a body to go with it. Reinforced Ronin, 1 mana red haste. At the beginning of your end step, return this card to your hand or channel discard it to draw a card. That is actually kind of cool. It's a 1 mana 2/2 which just bounces to your hand and doesn't cause any other negative effect, but lets you draw a card later on. Very early damage dealing. Actually pretty decent, honestly. Especially since it will attack alone and trigger other stuff's going off. Not so good in the late game, definitely good in the early game. Scrap Welder, Goblin Artificer. Sacrifice an artifact with value X, then return artifact with less than X from the graveyard to the battlefield, and it gains haste. Okay, so this is an updated Goblin Welder, where instead of being able to just swap 1 for 1, it's making return something with less than the thing you sacrifice, which isn't fantastic, but it has a bigger body, which is 3/3. I can see this being good. Like, for example, you could sacrifice, I don't know, what do we have up here? The Lizard Blades for the Rabbit Battery if you needed it, or the Ogre-Headed Helm for something else. We've got plenty of artifact creatures. Was it a tap ability? It is a tap, so it's a bit slower than I would like it, but I think that's a decent card. Scrapyard Steelbreaker here, which is an artifact creature. Again, Scrap Welder here cares about it. Sacrifice an artifact. It gets slightly bigger to end of turn. That's not great. That's really not great. It's sacrifice fodder for Scrap Welder now. Seismic Wave, 2 damage to any target, 1 damage to each non-target artifact they control. It's an instant speed, deal 2 damage something for 3 mana and then 1 damage to everything else. It needs an extra line of text of some kind to make it better. Gain control of target creature. The Shattered States Error. Gain control of target creature, untap it. Cool, always like that kind of effect, although 5 is a lot for it. Creature control get +1/+0, not super relevant a lot of times. And the creature is the Nameless Conqueror, travel haste 3/3. Again, not fantastic. The first effect, there's a lot cheaper versions of it, and even those aren't played. The other half, creatures get bigger, not fantastic, and at the stage you get this out, a 3/3 isn't good for that cost. Simian Sling. Quick creature gets +1/+1 whenever it attacks. Whenever it becomes blocked, deal 1 damage to the defending player. No, this is just poor. This is just really poor. It looks silly as hell, but it's really not good. Sozen Smelter. During your combat each turn, you may pay 1, sacrifice an artifact. If you do, create a 3/1 construct creature token with haste. Get rid of older artifacts, replace them. 2 mana for a 2/2. Never going to complain, that's actually pretty okay. The fact there's only 1 to do so is good. Like, for example, you can sacrifice this monkey to actually create a bigger creature, which is more relevant. Tempered in Solitude. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, exile the top card of your library and play it this turn. We haven't seen many, like, just default enchantments, have we? And that's not a bad one, honestly. Like, the only thing that always worries me about this, and this is just my personal bias here, I always worry about the exile card off the top of your library effects, because I feel like I won't be able to play the card and I'll just lose it, and then that's going to cost me a game. Thundering Raiju, the 4 mana card here for 3/3 with haste, so that's actually more relevant already. Whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then Thundering Raiju deals X damage to each opponent where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Thundering Raiju. Okay, this is decent actually, because Thundering Raiju itself gives things counters, so it already makes things modified. So it's always defaultly going to do 1 damage as long as you control another creature. It's a 3/3 with haste, so it will always swing straight away. 4 mana isn't too bad for that kind of cost. I think this is a really decent card. Like, the fact it actually actively triggers its own effect by making something bigger is much more useful than some of the other cards we've seen. Toragosty Songshape. Is this just a DJ? Yes, it is just a DJ. Why is there a DJ here? Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under control, gets slightly bigger. It's cheap. It's a 2/2 for 2. It's an Artificer, which could be relevant. It's generic. It's super generic. I like comparing it to the Goblin Artificer up here. I think the Sozen Smelter is better because it has an effect which will always go off, more likely, whereas this other one only does it to end of turn and just like makes itself slightly bigger. The fact it doesn't power up its defense may cause a problem, but it's good. It's okay. It's good for its costing. 20-shot Sniper is a reach. I thought it was an equipment. Never mind. It's a 4 mana reach 2/3, so costing is not fantastic. When it enters the battlefield, deal 2 damage to any target. Discard it to do 2 damage to any target. Not fantastic, honestly. It's an artifact, which is probably the most relevant part of that line. Unstoppable Ogre. Let's see here. When it attacks or blocks, only one other creature can attack and block this turn. Oh, sorry, no. Target creature can't block this turn. I misread that dramatically. The effect is okay, but 3 mana, 4/1. It's easily destroyable. Like, we've seen so many things in here which just deal 1 damage to something or makes it 1 smaller. It's just going to die. It's just going to die. Like, if you try playing this, it's going to get removed immediately. You're not going to get a chance to get to the turn where you get to hit with it. Usurper Renegade. 2 mana, 1/3. Gets +2/+0 for each other modified creature you control. See, this is actually more relevant than DJ, because this is a 1/3 already, but it permanently gains the bonus for each other card you have of the type of it. So I think this is better than the other one. Voltric Surge, additional cost, you may sacrifice an artifact, deal 2 damage to any creature. If you paid additional cost, deal 4 damage instead. For 1 mana, that's not too bad. It's a shock. It's a shock of the thing. Do 2 damage to a thing and make it more if you sacrifice something on top of it. I think that is perfectly playable, perfectly relevant. But that is it for the red side of things. Honestly, red has probably disappointed me. I think it's got the most relevant X cycle card out of all of them, but I feel like its big burn spell is too expensive, and it's playing a lot with the exile the top card of your library effects, which are very hard to play around, especially since so far, maybe Green will change my mind on this, but mana has seemed to be a big issue. One of the major things though is it does have a instant win con card in its pile, which is just that Dragonfire card, which you can get that so big so fast, and the fact it's not legendary, you can play multiple copies, a lot of creatures themselves are artifacts to start with. I feel like that's going to be the most playable card out of this entire like set so far, at least in terms of just like the red cards. But who knows, I could be wrong. As I said, this is my cover over blindly, so let me know what you guys think in the comments below. We're going to be covering over green in the next part, which is going to be probably recorded in a minute. I am probably sounding more and more tired because, oh boy, I should not be doing all in one go, but that's just my madness. But let me know what you think. Let me know what you think the infinite combo pieces are for that dragon, because I feel like there definitely is something I've missed on that line. But until next time, we're going to cover over green next.